With so many new medications out there for multiple sclerosis, you would think that the medical community, if not the physician community, would be leaving the old ones in the dust. But no. Well, hello and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam and I've been living with MS for 40 years. I was interested recently to see an article extolling the new virtues of Tecfidera, which is a medicine that's been around for a long time. So I want to go over this article with you and then have a couple of folks weigh in on the side effects, the efficacy in comparison to other DMTs, and other pros and cons of Tecfidera. Again, the article is published in Multiple Sclerosis News Today, which you probably noticed has become really kind of a primary publication for me to get a lot of the multiple sclerosis research news, and I appreciate it. I try to verify it by looking at a few other sources along the way, but I like their style of writing because they do tend to write clearly and succinctly and not use too many words that require you to have a biology degree to understand. Anyway, today's article is called Long-Term Tecfidera Slows MS Disability Progression in Large Trial. New analysis shows approved therapy also significantly reduces relapse rates. This came out on January 6th of 2025, and it's reporting on research that was published in December of 2024. So my question a few videos back, when they were talking about the best things that had happened in the field this last year, that article was published in October, and I thought, wait a minute, how can we know that that's the best stuff? We've got 2 more months. You mean nothing ever happens in December? Well, apparently something does, so let's find out more. They say that treatment with Tecfidera, which is dimethyl fumerate, significantly reduces relapse rates for people with multiple sclerosis, and most MS patients on the approved therapy remain free from disability progression for several years. That's according to a final analysis from the Phase 4 ESTEEM clinical trial, and there's the number, which tracked outcomes from Tecfidera treatment among more than 5,100 MS patients. That is a very large number of people. The results also did not reveal any unexpected safety issues with the long-approved therapy, the researchers noted. That is also excellent news. The ESTEEM study, in which over 5,000 patients received Tecfidera in a real-world setting for up to 6.5 years, indicated sustained effectiveness of Tecfidera and safety consistent with the well-known profile of Tecfidera, the team wrote. The study, titled Long-Term Safety and Effectiveness of Dimethyl Fumarate in Patients with Multiple Sclerosis Treated in Routine Medical Practice, Final Analysis of the ESTEEM Study, was published in Neurology and Therapy. The work was funded by Biogen, which markets name brand Tecfidera. Several generic versions of the therapy are also available. So, knowing that the study was funded by the pharmaceutical company that owns and markets Tecfidera, it doesn't necessarily mean it's of no scientific value, but it always does put a little red flag up for me, because I want to be sure that this is not just a work for hire kind of project. That, I know science is not supposed to do that, but hey, I'm not that naive. I know how things go, and so do you. And they say that researchers call ESTEEM the largest and longest real-world setting study. Tecfidera has been approved in the U.S. as a treatment for relapsing types of MS for more than a decade. The therapy's mechanism of action isn't fully understood, but it's broadly thought to work by modulating the activity of immune cells, thereby limiting the inflammation in the brain and spinal cord that drives MS. The ESTEEM study, completed in 2022, tracked outcomes from 5,124 patients who were treated at nearly 400 sites around the globe with at least one dose of the medication. The study's main goal was to evaluate safety outcomes, but the treatment's effect on MS relapses and disability progression was also assessed. Almost all, 98.9% of the study's participants, were specifically diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS. The study included nearly 1,500 people who started on Tecfidera after being newly diagnosed with MS, and about 2,200 who had previously been on interferon treatments or glatiramer acetate sold as Copaxone and others. The average duration of Tecfidera treatment was 31 months, or about 2.5 years, though some patients had more than 6 years of follow-up data available. The clinical effectiveness results reported here are, to our knowledge, from the largest and longest real-world setting study of Tecfidera, the researchers noted. They say that MS relapse rates dropped by 90% for patients on Tecfidera. That's incredibly huge. About half, or 51%, of the participants stopped taking the medication at some point during the study, with nearly 1 in 5, or 22% of them, stopping Tecfidera specifically due to safety issues. There's the rub. The most common safety issues leading to treatment discontinuation were digestive complaints and low counts of immune cells, both of which are well-established side effects of Tecfidera. And if those are major concerns for you, or if you've tried it and you've had those problems and you can't live with them, it's a good reason to discontinue treatment, for sure. Serious safety issues were documented in 8%, or fewer than 400, of the patients on Tecfidera, which sounds low until you find out that you're one of the 400, right? The most common serious safety problems were infections. The researchers highlighted, however, that there was not a clear connection between low counts of immune cells and infections while on treatment, even though that does seem kind of intuitively obvious, doesn't it? Compared with rates from before starting on Tecfidera, relapse rates while on the medication were reduced by 90.1%, from 0.81 relapses per year at the study's start to 0.08 relapses per year over 6 years of treatment. Data after 4 years also indicated that 87.6% of patients had not experienced disability worsening that was sustained for at least 48 weeks, or nearly 1 year. After 6 years, the rate of patients without sustained disability progression was similar at 87%. In fact, about 16.7% of participants had experienced sustained improvements in disability, meaning their symptoms were less severe after 6 years. Well, that's really quite striking. That's something to really be guardedly excited about. Safety and efficacy outcomes were broadly similar across all subgroups of patients, including those who were newly diagnosed, those who had previously been on other MS treatments, and patients with milder disease. Likewise, analyses from the study overall also have indicated that the safety and efficacy of Tecfidera are consistent across racial and ethnic groups. The data reported in ESTEEM were overall comparable with findings from other shorter studies of Tecfidera in MS patients. These data demonstrate that Tecfidera is an effective treatment option in the real-world setting, with a well-known safety record, the scientists concluded. Let's listen to Dr. Brandon Bieber tell us a little bit more about how Tecfidera works and what the side effects are likely to be.
Now, the way the drug works is it's dimethyl fumerate, and it's metabolized in the body immediately to monomethyl fumarate. And it's not exactly known how it works, but it has a couple of known effects that are potential mechanisms of action. One is that it reduces lymphocytes, which is a subclass of white blood cells, so it weakly suppresses the immune system. Another is that it activates a certain transcription factor, NRF2, which is known to be related to oxidative stress. So it's thought that it may work within the central nervous system itself, making the central nervous system more resistant to injury, but it's not exactly 100% known. Now, believe it or not, fumarate is actually just an intermediate of the Krebs cycle, which is a major metabolic pathway going on in every cell in your body at all times. So fumarate exists naturally within the body. So people were just blown away that this could have any benefit whatsoever in people with MS, but it does. So here are the data from the CONFIRM trial, which is one of the 2 phase 3 trials leading to this drug getting approved. And if you look compared to placebo and compared to glatiramer acetate, which is Copaxone, you can see that Tecfidera causes certain side effects. One is flushing, which is redness and itching of the skin, which I experienced. And it causes some gastrointestinal side effects, such as diarrhea, nausea, and stomach pain. Usually these are worse in certain people and people who just start the drug recently. And again, people try to take it with large meals and start at the 120 milligram dose. Now, if you look at this diagram, you can see that a lot of the gastrointestinal side effects are early on. So when people have side effects, they often try to wait it out for a month or 2 and see if they go away, although people can have this side effect at any point. And what's happening here is, one, people kind of get used to the side effects and used to the drug, and the body becomes accustomed to it. But also a lot of people who have really bad side effects, they just stop taking it. The same is true with flushing and gastrointestinal side effects. Now, I talked about low white blood cell counts, and if you look compared to placebo and compared to glatiramer, you can see that people who take Tecfidera, and this is 2 different doses of Tecfidera at blue and purple, can have low lymphocytes. Usually the decrease is very mild, maybe 10-15%. However, in some people, they can have dramatic reductions in lymphocyte counts, and this can make people more susceptible to getting infections. So monitoring of the lymphocyte counts is recommended. Now, according to the product label, it's recommended that you stop the medication if the lymphocyte count is less than 0.5 for more than 6 months. However, this is quite aggressive. A lot of doctors would recommend stopping it, or at least stopping it temporarily, if the absolute lymphocyte count is less than 0.8, even on a single blood draw. Of course, you would have to discuss this with your clinician, depends on the clinical context. Now, why is the lymphocyte count such a big deal? Well, the problem is there are very rare cases of an infection known as PML, progressive multifocal leukoencephalopathy. You've probably heard about this because of its association with the drug Tysabri, or natalizumab. And primarily, the risk of PML in multiple sclerosis drugs is with Tysabri, where the risk can be as high as 1 in 250, as you can see in this chart. However, PML has been rarely reported to occur with other multiple sclerosis medications. And just to give you a brief background, PML is caused by the JC virus, which is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Anyone could be infected with it. But usually the immune system just shuts it down, so it doesn't really cause any symptoms. But in rare cases of people with a weakened immune system, the virus can become activated and infect the brain, and the disease is progressive. It often involves multiple parts of the brain, hence multifocal, and it involves the white matter, hence leukoencephalopathy. And it's a horrible and potentially fatal disease, though luckily extremely rare. Now, the point is, with Tecfidera, the risk is about 1 in 55,000, and probably greater if the absolute lymphocyte count is low, and most of the reported cases are with low absolute lymphocyte counts. So presumably this can be prevented in most cases if we monitor the cell counts. And the risk is lower than with a lot of these other medications, as you can see in the chart. Now, what about other side effects? Rarely people can have serious allergies or even anaphylaxis, although this is uncommon, and liver injury has also been reported, although it's rare and usually resolves when the drug is stopped. Now, I haven't really seen this reported in people with multiple sclerosis, but with the other drugs in psoriasis, fumaric esters were reported to cause Fanconi syndrome, which is a rare kidney disease where the proximal renal tubules become dysfunctional and your kidneys start leaking certain electrolytes and amino acids, and it causes other problems. Again, we haven't really seen this, to my knowledge, in multiple sclerosis, but it's a potential side effect.
So the other half of the equation, besides safety, is, of course, does it work? The efficacy. And here again, Dr. Brandon Beaver is going to compare all the DMTs that were available in 2023, because that's where this came out, and tell us how Tecfidera ranks in terms of the other DMTs that are available.
The point I'm trying to make is this is not clean data. These are not head-to-head trials. These are indirect comparisons using a complicated algorithm to approximate relative efficacy. So again, take the results with a grain of salt. But anyway, these are the rankings for disease-modifying therapies versus placebo. So the number you see on the right is the relative risk. So at the very top is alemtuzumab, Limtrada, which has a 0.28 relative risk of relapses. In other words, a 72% reduction in the risk of relapses versus placebo. Again, this drug was not studied against placebo. It was thought to be a very strong drug. It was thought that it better beat an active comparator, Rebif, if it's going to be used on the market, given the risk of immunosuppression and secondary autoimmune disease. So this is a number derived sort of arbitrarily based on the algorithm I showed you earlier, approximate efficacy versus placebo. I have everything color-coded below, but I'll try to read the generic name and the trade name. So alemtuzumab, Limtrada, ofatumumab, Kesimpta coming in second at 0.30 relative risk or 70% reduction in relapses. Ublituximab, Briumvi, natalizumab, Tysabri, Ocrevus or ocrelizumab, fingolimod, Gilenya, cladribine or Mavenclad, 0.42 relative risk, 58% reduction in relapses. Ozanimod, ponesimod, Ponvory, dimethyl fumerate, Tecfidera, 50% reduction in relapses. Glitiramer acetate, Copaxone, Glitopa, 20 milligram daily dose, 0.64 relative risk, only 36% reduction in relapses. Interferon beta 1b, the high dose, 44 micrograms subcutaneous 3 times a week. Glitiramer acetate, the 40 milligram 3 time a week dose. Teriflunomide or Aubagio, the high dose, 14 milligrams. Interferon beta 1a Rebif, the low dose, 22 micrograms. Interferon beta 1b subcutaneous, in other words, Extavia or beta seron, and interferon beta 180 intramuscular, in other words, Avonex, and the low dose of teriflunomide or Aubagio, 7 milligrams at a 0.79 relative risk, in other words, only 21% reduction in relapses.
So as you can see, Tecfidera is in the middle of the pack here. It's neither the most effective nor the least effective.
Next, we move to the network analysis for 3-month confirmed disability progression. In other words, someone worsens and then 3 months later, they're still worse, implying that they've had an actual progression event. You can see a lot of the studies are the same here. You note natalizumab or Tysabri versus placebo, the AFFIRM study, fingolimod or Gilenya versus placebo in the FREEDOM studies, and versus Avonex or interferon beta 1a in the TRANSFORMS trial. And these are the results. Now, I'm going to skip this quickly. This is as defined by the individual trial, and I'll move quickly to as defined by the standard definition, more accurate and more fair in my opinion, although if I flip back and forth, you can see there aren't huge differences. So the top spot is now Ocrevus with a relative risk of 0.4, so a 60% reduced risk of 3-month confirmed disability progression. Pretty good if you ask me. Very close behind is ofatumumab or Kesimpta, and Limtrada with a relative risk of 0.44, a reduction of 56%, is about the same. And so you're probably taking additional risk with Limtrada, with the risk of more infections and secondary autoimmune disease in the short run. But perhaps there's the appeal of not having to take it long term, maybe making it somewhat less risky in real life in the very long term. Next is natalizumab or Tysabri, Ponvory, ponesimod, ublituximab, Briumvi. You can see a huge confidence interval, not even statistically significant. Dimethyl fumerate or Tecfidera, cladribine or Mavenclad, the high dose of beta interferon 1a subcutaneous, in other words, Rebif, the high dose of teriflunomide or Aubagio, 14 milligrams. Now the lower dose of interferon beta 1a, 22 micrograms. Only 0.71 relative risk, in other words, 29% reduction in disability progression. Not a huge difference, but about the same as Gilenya, fingolimod, 0.73, or only 27% reduction in disability progression versus placebo. Ozanimod, or Zeposia, you can see it overlaps one, not even statistically significant. The low-dose daily dose of Copaxone glutarimer acetate, 20 milligrams, beta-seron or Extavia interferon beta-1a subcutaneous, Avonex interferon beta-1a intramuscular. You can see a relative risk of 0.81, not even statistically significant, 19% reduction in disability progression, and the low dose of teriflunomide or Aubagio, 7 milligrams. Finally, we move to 6-month confirmed disability progression. In other words, this means someone gets worse and 6 months later, they're still worse. And I actually think this is better than 3-month confirmed disability progression. You never know, there could be temporary variation based on a mild relapse or even seasonal variation. I think if you're still worse 6 months later, that's even more meaningful. And you can see more of the modern trials look at this outcome, and I think we're going to see more and more trials compared against teriflunomide or Aubagio 14 milligrams simply because it's a once-a-day pill. It's easier to get people to agree to a study where if they get randomized to the undesired drug, in other words, the older drug, at least it's just a once-a-day pill that's relatively well tolerated for most people, even if it's not highly effective. But anyway, here are the results. I'll briefly flash the results based on disability progression as defined in the original trials. Again, I think it's more accurate to look at a standard definition. Now, alemtuzumab or Limtrada takes the top spot, relative risk of 0.43. In other words, 57% reduction in 6-month disability progression. Again, this is an indirect comparison. The drug was actually studied against Rebif, and Rebif was studied against placebo, so it's a little bit of fuzzy math here. So take this number again with a grain of salt. Tysabri or natalizumab, 0.46. Ofatumumab or Kesimpta, 0.48. Ocrevus or ublituximab, Briumvi, cladribine, Mavenclad. One thing I note is that there really aren't huge differences between these higher efficacy medications, so it's unlikely there are major differences in their efficacy in preventing disability progression. So it makes more sense to choose a medication based on convenience, potential side effects, that kind of thing, because there probably aren't big differences in their efficacy for this outcome. Cladribine, Mavenclad, ponesimod, Ponvory, fingolimod, Gilenya, dimethyl fumerate, and you can see only a relative risk here of 0.68, in other words, 32%, or roughly a third reduction in 6-month confirmed disability progression. Not a huge difference, but there is something there. Here, interferon beta-1a intramuscular Avonex sort of jumps the other interferons. This isn't really plausible. A low-dose, low-efficacy beta interferon shouldn't be better than Rebif, which is actually the same drug given more frequently, but sometimes there can be some random variation in trials. Aubagio, teriflunomide, 14 milligrams, glutarimer acetate 20 milligrams daily. You can see not statistically significant, 0.79 relative risk, which would only be a 21% reduction. The high dose of Rebif, the low dose of teriflunomide or Aubagio 7 milligrams, and you can see ozanimod Zeposia didn't even do better at all than placebo. You can see 1.01 relative risk, and those are the results.
So I suppose it's important to point out that as a summary, the original results, dimethyl fumarate was 10 out of 18 tested against placebo, and then after 3 months it was 7 out of 17, and then after 6 months it was 9 out of 15. Interesting data. I'm not sure entirely what to make of it, but I think it's important for us to realize it's not a miracle. I think you can see that it's important when choosing an MS medication not to just look at the side effect profile or the safety statistics. You also want to compare it against all the other options that are available to us. And believe me, there are many of them. Dr. Bieber's list was pretty long, but it certainly wasn't all inclusive. The other thing I wish it would have included would have been some non-pharmacological options, but that's too much to ask for, I suppose. At any rate, I hope what you got out of it is that we can't take the information on Tecfidera just in isolation. Well, there you go. Interesting, shall we say. I'd be interested to know from you. Have you ever been on Tecfidera? Are you currently taking it? If you've had experience with it, what has been your experience? Number one, has it had nasty side effects you didn't like? Number two, did it reduce your relapses? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear. But that is all I have for you today. So until my next video, please do continue to take really good care of yourself.